Hey, what up, beautiful seekers? Welcome back. How are you? I hope you had a good week. This week we have something really great for you. We have a conversation with a friend from Reddit who reached out and told me he had an interesting journey to share. The journey that we talk about in this conversation together is his moving from a very traditional, conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical, Calvinist Christian community to a space of kindness, love, and acceptance. And Steve shares the really beautiful moments along the journey where things began to open up and change for him, in addition to the moments of pain and difficulty where things didn't fit together and things did not make sense. And it is a very honest, a very human, and a very down-to-earth conversation. And to be honest, this week I was feeling a bit emotionally down, but deciding to put out a video and getting to look at this footage that I had filmed with Steve a few months back really lifted up my spirits. And so thank you, Steve, for sharing this conversation with me and for allowing me to re-experience it and to lift me up again. And I hope that it inspires you and lifts you. One does not need to be a Christian or a Calvinist to understand and appreciate Steve's journey, but us all humans, particularly those grappling with religious questions in whatever denomination and community we belong to, really do go through the same questions and journeys. And that is part of what we're trying to do at the channel, is to create a community of people who want to move from a place which is religiously constrictive and othering and perhaps even hateful to one which is much more full of love and compassion and tenderness. If you appreciate the videos that we make here and the work that we do, then you will have to join me in thanking our patrons who, with their support, allow us to get some better equipment here. If you like this project as well, and you like the message and what we're trying to get out there and create, and would like to support us and support our production value, please head over to our Patreon, link in the description. And with no further ado, I'm going to turn to a quote from Steve. It was very hard to pick one quote because the whole conversation was just littered with fantastic quotes. And then we will kick off with Steve's journey and story. Thank you so much again for joining us this week. And if you have not yet, make sure to subscribe and share this video with your friends. We're doing something really cool and fun here, and it's great to be back again.
This idea settled on me that reality isn't as tame as we think it is, right? It's not as simple. It's not this all the time, the simple, straightforward interacting. Sometimes crazy things happen that we can't explain. And the mystics are really just documenting this in their literature, right? They're talking about their inner experience of the inner world, things that happen to them, like ecstasies that unfolded for them, divine encounters. And the thing is, they seem to be fringe enough that most of us can write them off as crazy. But if you step into that world, all of a sudden you realize, like, oh, all right, so reality looks like this most of the time, but occasionally it breaks the rules. I guess. What else do you say? Like, yeah.
So, let's see. Where do we begin? So, Steve, we had like a really...
You're driving.
Good. We had a really wonderful conversation. What was it, last week? 2 weeks ago? Just almost out of nowhere. Yeah. And the beauty of this, of the possibility today and of the technology, is that really anyone that's interested in doing something together can connect and find, and that both is there for the good and the bad. And it's great to be hopefully part of people who are coalescing on that opportunity and capitalizing it to put forces together for the good. And you were sharing me a bit of your story, and it was absolutely fascinating and riveting. And what I found so fascinating about it was that although it happens in a totally different religion, in a totally different country, in a totally different space and culture, the fundamental, like, human points of the story were so familiar to myself and to, like, story of so many of my friends. And I'm sure that the same way that crossed across our boundaries will cross, like, so many other boundaries. And I think that's something which I'm really excited to discuss and to show. So I would like to invite you to share with us your incredible story and journey. And I'm going to interrupt you continually along the way to ask questions and to
please do. And I don't know if you have a desired format for it, but I'm actually really interested too, and your audience might be interested too. And we kind of talked about the different parallels. I'm kind of interested too, maybe as I tell my story, what is the version that you're hearing from your friends that you went through too? What are the similarities, and maybe where does it diverge?
For sure.
I'm personally very curious about that as well. I know there's a lot of, it's a very similar, maybe it's just a similar path of spiritual growth, right? even though it's
Yeah.
from different sources,
Yeah.
different root sources, religious sources, right?
Yeah. I do
Yeah,
think there's
so
a strong similarity, and I think it will be really cool to highlight that along the way. You know what I've actually noticed, like now in kind of being in this like interspiritual world, is that the similarities become so abundant that they stop being interesting, and what becomes more rare and more interesting is actually the differences, which is like the irony is
yeah,
fantastic, because you'd expect it to be entirely different, but because it's so similar, it's like the actual difference is like, oh wow, that's actually a fascinating, like, nuanced difference. And perhaps we'll get to discuss those and analyze them as they come up.
yeah, that'd be cool. Before I get started, I think we have a little bit of a latency offset. So if you interrupt me and it seems like I'm still talking, just give me a second. I think we'll sync up, and
Good.
I'll hear your question through.
I could see that tech
Um,
mind thinking.
yeah. Yeah, this is a little delay somewhere. I don't know whose side it's on, so it might be tricky, but I think we'll figure it out.
Good.
Yeah, so you want me to just start with my background, where I was, and we'll walk through that?
Yeah, take us back to the origins, back to the background, and we'll just walk through as it
Yeah.
goes organically.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I grew up in a conservative, like Calvinistic, fundamentalist, KJV only, the King James version. I don't know if everyone that may listen to this understands it's a specific version that evangelical Christians have latched onto, as if somehow that translation is like, some would say it's the only truly inspired translation. Just an interesting idea. And I'm sure from Jewish background, that's even more ridiculous in a sense. Good translation. Like there are religious traditions that read in the original language,
Right.
But it wasn't about learning Hebrew and the Greek and then claiming superiority, which there maybe is a little bit more credence to that. It was a specific translation, right? So, and that's kind of true of fundamentalism. There's a bunch of little ways that you try to find that superior stance, right? The more pure, the purer kind of way of practicing your tradition, at least from my Christian perspective.
What's the sorry to interrupt. Is that to try and be exclusivistic? Like what do you think is the group psychology behind that?
There is a push, a really hard push. So my dad's side of the family, a lot of them are pastors or theologians. His brother's got his PhD. My cousin is working on his PhD. I don't think he has it yet. The one uncle's a pastor. His other older brother is a pastor. So there's just a lot, and his dad was a pastor as well. And so there's a lot of there's already kind of this sense of like the higher calling, right? And then inside of and the fundamentalism is almost part of the family tradition too. And I think some of that tradition is that you can kind of push back against textual criticism, right? In like when I went to school and took seminary classes, to a Bible college and a seminary, and took Bible classes, we looked at the text and we pulled apart ways in which this translation actually got it better. If you look at these manuscripts, and this translation actually added this chapter. This chapter wasn't in the earlier manuscripts. And some new translations will say that. They'll caveat different portions of the New Testament and say, this wasn't in the earliest translation, in the earliest manuscripts, but later it was. So if you can just latch onto a translation, you don't have to worry about any of that, because all the other stuff's evil and manipulated, and this is the one thing. So I never really said this out loud, or maybe even connected these dots, but it's sort of a way to enforce anti-intellectualism into your faith tradition. So you don't have to worry about what the academics are saying. You don't have to worry about what the archaeological finds are, or if there's new manuscripts that are found. Like the Dead Sea Scrolls was a major upset for fundamentalism, right? They had to deal with these other manuscripts resurfacing and dealing with some texts that the ancient Christians would have considered holy that we don't anymore, right? Because the canon has also shifted and changed.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big piece of it. I think a big piece of it is it eliminates all this peripheral dissecting of the text from an intellectual perspective.
Right. Interesting. By like setting the pin at like a later point in history and saying that's like the divine moment, and like having the faith that that moment was inspired, you don't need to worry about any complications that precede that. Interesting.
so there's fundamentalism in general, and maybe you could even like stretch it into kind of conservatism in general, seems to want to do this. They want to pick a point in time, like the good old days that we're trying to get back to, right? At least in American culture, the conservatives oftentimes will hold up like the 1950s or something, this era when you had neighbors and you had white picket fences and everyone knew everybody and everything was good. You know, but it wasn't good for lots of people. If you're a person of color, it wasn't good. If you're a woman, it wasn't good. But there's like these fence post times where you say like, this is the moment of purity we arrived at, and we've got to get back there. We've got to go back to that moment of purity, whether it's a version of the Bible or an era in the culture. So that's all.
Interesting. Yeah, there's some sort of like nostalgia, and that must feed into a sense of traditionalism. And I think there's also a natural human psychological aspect there, where there's a fear of the new and of the unknown, and we don't know if what's going to come is going to be as good or as stable as what we had and what we knew to be true and good. So I definitely like understand that from a human perspective. So you grew up in a very staunch and very serious Calvinist family and community. I would love if you could tell us about your upbringing and about what it was like to grow up in such a community, and as well, if you could do a solid for us, is to tell us a bit about Calvinism and Lutheranism and Protestantism in general, just to give us a bit of a picture of the flavor of Christianity that you come from.
So the faith community was it just depended. Like, I went to different churches still, and there's variation inside even that kind of fundamentalist kind of community, but there's a hyper focus on purity, right? Bodily purity and kind of very simplistic spiritual practice. Like, there's this book in Sunday school, or this song in Sunday school that really sums it up well. It says, you read your Bible, you pray every day, and you'll grow, right? And it's kind of like, it's like this very simple, this is the recipe for connecting with the divine, is you sit and read your Bible, you say your prayers, and then you'll grow. And the way in which you read your Bible is everything's literal, right? So the only way to read it is to sort of downplay or do away with the idea that there's different genres of books, you know, whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament. And you certainly don't do any textual criticism. You don't get too deep into, well, that was for that culture, maybe it's not for us today. You do as much as you can. You want to do away with that. And so it creates all kinds of issues, right? Because the Bible doesn't say one thing start to cover. There's a lot of different types of stories. There's a lot of different types of advice. There's a lot of different types of actions that the characters take, right? And so it creates a lot of tension for people that are paying attention and trying to apply a one-size-fits-all model to their lives based on a literal reading of the text. But you don't talk about it. A fundamentalist community, you don't talk about it, and you get a whole lot of very simple little, what we would call Sunday school answers. Really trite little, answers to big questions, like the problem, things like the problem of evil, right? And so you take that and then you inject not all I don't think all fundamentalists are necessarily are Calvinists, right? There's other branches of fundamentalism, but Calvin's main points were there's this mnemonic device called TULIP, if you're familiar with it. So the first one's total depravity, and this has to do with the fall and original sin. So humanity is just totally jacked up, screwed up, an extreme downplaying of being created in the image of God. Like, you barely ever even say it, really, unless you're reading Genesis for whatever reason, but you don't emphasize it. You don't talk about what that might mean for us. That's a big one. Unconditional election. So this idea that God selected who's going to burn forever and who's going to go to heaven, who's going to go to paradise, right? Which is a fascinating idea to latch onto, because they're also one of the most evangelical branches, knocking on doors, handing out tracts, trying to get people to say a certain prayer that will guarantee that they'll go to heaven, right? That will make them Christians. And it's like God already sorted all this out. So why are you evangelizing? Why are you doing any missions work at all? It's just very, you have to get used to that cognitive dissonance. You have to just okay, this doesn't make sense. And you just get okay with things not making sense. And a lot of verses like God's ways are not our ways will kind of smooth things election's over.
Is the idea that you don't know who falls into the election, and therefore you have to like go out and just in case the person you're preaching to will be the elect, then you'll be like giving them their ticket in?
I think some would say that you're still the vessel by which a person that's the elect is selected, but some wouldn't. Some people wouldn't. I mean, there are Calvinists that really don't understand missions, and they'll ask that. I have a friend who's a missionary in Africa who's a Calvinist, and when he got confirmed by the church that was going to support him to go and become a missionary, they said, "You're a Calvinist. Well, why do you care about missions?" Like that was a question by a group of elders and pastors to him before he went. So they know that there's a tension here with this belief system and wanting to go and teach the gospel. And I believe his answer was, Jesus said to go out and make disciples, so we're going out and making disciples. You know, that's the Great Commission. And even though it conflicts with one of the TULIP, pieces. So yeah, I don't know. Again, this stuff doesn't latch on to me like it once did. So I didn't even remember all the words. So
I really
limited atonement's a big one.
One second, right? Before you continue.
That Jesus didn't die for everybody. Sorry, go ahead.
Let me just ask you. I don't want to be seen here as mocking anyone's religious belief, and I don't want to strawman Lutheranism either. I know that there are plenty of very clever Lutherans, and I think Luther himself must have been a religious genius. And I think that in religious genius, there's genius of the psyche, and there's also sometimes neurotic, religious genius. And I'm curious to know if you have a sense of having grown up in that community, what the psychological obsession it seems that Luther had with salvation or damnation, and the need to know with certainty about that salvation. Do you have an understanding of what that means from a psychological perspective as someone who grew up in that community?
Can you restate the core of the question once
more? Yeah. As an outsider, it seems to me that someone like Luther had a almost like bordering on neurotic obsession with the need to know with certainty whether his soul was saved or whether his soul was damned. And that seems to be central to his theology. And this is just as an outsider's observation. I'm curious to know, as an insider, is that something that you feel in his thought? Is that something that is persistent in the community? And if that's the case, what would be, if we can sort of abstract it from its theological and metaphysical terms, what would that mean from like a human or psychological standpoint that would have led to such a theological outcome that we see in TULIP, for example?
Yeah, that's an interesting observation that need to know. I think, yeah, certainly. And you're right. Like, I don't just want to bash a certain side either. The good thing that Luther did from a Christian perspective is called out some really atrocious practices that the Roman Catholic Church was doing. They were selling indulgences and telling people that they could be cleansed if they bought certain little trinkets and knickknacks, right? Like, he was watching some really, like, objectively horrible things, abuses of power from a religious perspective, right, unfold in front of him. And so I think that's a big piece of it, is that, well, hold up, do these elite get to decide if we're in or not? Or is there an objective place we can go to know what this looks like, right? And then you get down the road, you get to like the John Calvins, right? So no, I'm not. Again, I think I believe there's a spiritual evolution that takes place. And I think it probably happens across all the different religious traditions. And Luther was necessary. And I think Calvin had his own slice of being necessary, right? I don't know that you ever just stay in the spot. Maybe you take the thing and you let the process grow you, right? Whatever the next thing is. But I think, yeah, maybe it's not so much about the certainty as do they get to tell us if we're in or not, right? And there's kind of an extension of this idea of what is the ground of truth here, and how does this book deliver us the truth? And so the TULIP thing is really important to establish. We don't need an outside source to tell us. We have the Bible that tells us. No priest tells us. No trinket to buy, right? We can know for ourselves. And then this is kind of a further dissection of how do we know? What are the important things to know? That's my lay kind of dissection of that. It's a great
interesting. So you're saying that there's some sort of democratization of power once the capacity for some sort of ultimate spiritual pronouncement is taken out of the hands of what at the time may have been corrupt men, and instead put into a sacred text or put into something more objective or third party. That's very interesting. Okay, let's.
Yeah, and you have to remember too, in that era, most of the population couldn't even read the Latin that the
Right,
priestly class
right,
was reading to them.
right.
So there was even more. There's just a lot of centralization of power that the Reformation tried to distribute down to the people. Yeah, and I'd say that's the positive, I think, piece that happened there.
Good. I'm glad we're balancing this with the positive as well, because I don't think it's too easy to just bash all religions. Yeah. And I think part of our job is to see the good as well.
On that. I need to call out because you're right. I was getting bitter.
All right, let's. I'm down to continue to go through the TULIP and then to hear more about your story.
Yeah. All right. So we did limited atonement. So Jesus atoning act was for a specific segment of people. Irresistible grace. So this idea that like if you're selected, you're good. You can't do anything to be out. And then the last one's perseverance of the saints. God is sovereign, will cannot be frustrated by humans or anything else. So those who are called into communion with God will maintain their communion. It sounds very similar to me to irresistible grace.
Yeah.
Maybe they're kind of two sides of that coin.
It sounds like there's a strong momentum of like a fatalism almost. Like God's will prevail.
Yeah. And it's preset, right? It's a preset thing and it's going to prevail, right? There's nothing you can really do about it. There's definitely very fatalistic, right? So the Arminians were kind of Jacob Arminius was kind of the contrast to Calvin, who was like a heretic. If you're a Calvin, he's a heretic. If you're Arminian, Calvin's kind of the heretic. And there was more of a sense of freedom. There's free will was more emphasized in that. It's still a fundamentalist model, but free will was more emphasized, that you actually get a say. And so from their perspective, of course, missions make sense. Evangelizing makes sense because we actually play a part in God's plan. So
interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting.
So, yeah.
Coming at it from a perspective of Jewish theology, growing up, the emphasis that's placed in contemporary Jewish theological education on the importance of free will, and in a very strong biblical sense, like the idea that God tells the people of Israel that I place before you life and death, good and evil, choose life. And the idea of free will and the creation in the image of God, and that itself being an expression of human will, is quite a strong concept. So is that something that you were not raised hearing as a strong theological message?
Probably not until I started questioning the TULIP kind of model myself, probably in high school. And in college, I got exposed to like a much broader range of Christian theology than just a very narrow. A lot of the times what happens with it was really more in high school, I suppose. That's when that started to crack open. Here's the thing about fatalism or everything set in stone is, even when I was younger, and I still believe this to this day, even if it's true, I don't know how that informs me to move in the world. Like, do I stop making decisions because they're going to be made for me? Like, practically speaking, I don't know how that idea was going to change. I'm still called to love, and this is kind of a Calvinistic response. You're still called to love. You're called to make disciples. The model of Jesus still stands, and that's kind of how you work around the TULIP model. Is well, Jesus did these things, so we're going to do them, even if we don't understand how it all fits together. Right?
Yeah.
But there's models of consciousness, right, that also will say the same thing from a neurological perspective, that everything, like, you're not making your decisions. You don't even know where your thoughts come from. And I say the same thing to them, like, okay, what am I supposed to do with that information? I'm still going to wake up. I'm going to try to treat my family right. I'm going to try to love my community. Like, what am I supposed to do with that, practically speaking?
Yeah. As you were speaking, I was just thinking that, like, sort of the Daniel Dennett's and whoever it is who are arguing, like, that free will is an illusion. Like, practically, we're still going to live our lives feeling our autonomy because that's at least there an illusion. And therefore, like, what difference does it make? Like, if fundamentally, so like in actuality, the practice is the same. That's a well taken point. So take us back to where you are, and as you progress through education and your own evolution in your religious thought. I am anxious to hear.
So things cracked open fairly quickly for me because it's so interesting. So I grew up in these kind of fundamentalist Baptist churches, and then we went to this church school for my like middle school through high school education. That was an Assembly of God's church, which is very charismatic, which is they would be considered evangelical, but they wouldn't be like Calvinist, fundamentalist, type of a church. They were speaking in tongues, dancing around, much more exuberant, the tambourines, you know, just a lot more energy and a lot of emphasis on healing, on prayer, on anointing with oil. And so I went to a school with the principal who was the associate pastor. So we got that theology. And then the youth group for the church I went to, the Baptist church I went to, was so boring. And I had a bunch of friends that went to another church called a Christian and Missionary Alliance, right? So it's not, I don't think it's a very well-known, but they have a strong emphasis on missions, right? So it's just interesting how each one of these Christian denominations has like locked in on specific passages and verses, and that's what they make kind of their purview for what they're going to move towards.
Right.
And so all of a sudden I realized like, oh, there are these Christians. It was still evangelicalism. My bubble was still evangelical Christianity, but I was seeing all these different flavors and lenses. And so there was all kinds of conversations we had, because I knew pastors now that didn't believe in that TULIP was really the defining theological stances, right, for their Christian walk and their faith. And so it was kind of the dawn of me having conversations like this. It wasn't quite interfaith, but it was like baby steps, right? It was interdenominational, at least, even if it was inside of evangelicalism. And one of the biggest things for me was to realize, like, these people, the thing that was really important to me then was, well, do they love Jesus, right? That's such a central tenet to Christianity. And I knew they loved Jesus and totally disagreed with my pastor at my church, at like the church I went to on Sunday. And then I went to youth group on Wednesdays at this church, and my youth pastor believed something totally different than, you know, who would have been my youth pastor at the church that I attended, but I hated their youth group. Was so boring and stale that we just stopped going there. And my dad was torn up about it. He really wanted us, he surrendered it eventually, but he really wanted it. We actually snuck to youth group at a different denomination. It was a big deal. There was some drama. We had a family meeting around it. And what's funny is I grew up on a campus, it was a campus where juvenile delinquents that got in trouble with the law that were my age, I was in high school at the time, got sent here, and there was cabins, and my parents were house parents. So they helped rehabilitate these kids and help them learn the life skills that they weren't learning in their homes. And so this is where I lived, and my dad's like doing this reality check. We have kids here that were like dealing drugs, some that had assaulted people, like they're serving, like this is their time they're serving, right? As minors that had committed a crime. And then here are his kids that he's mad because they went to a different church, and he had this epiphany, like, this is such a small problem. Like, what am I worried about? It's funny. I like hearing him tell that story today because it's just such a funny story.
That's fantastic. You
can get so sucked into your lane of spiritual belief, right? And make it a big deal.
Right.
So yeah, all of that lent to me kind of, I don't know that I necessarily was questioning specifically at that point what I had been given or what I had inherited through like kind of my family's tradition, but I was being exposed to a much wider breadth of Christian beliefs, even inside of the evangelical faith. And that was, I don't think even at the time I knew how that was working on me, what that was doing for my soul, how that was kind of freeing me up, opening me up to realize that maybe God's doing something bigger than any of these one denominations know how to give credit to, or even maybe see clearly what's happening, because we all want to like carve out our slice of the truth and then push everyone else out, make our tribes the in tribe, everyone else is the out tribe. And if anything happened during that era, it was the start of getting bitter towards the church, because I started to read the Gospels really seriously, and I was doing word studies then. I had like my concordances, like a Strong's Concordance and a Vines were like the two big companions for reading the Bible. So I could look up Hebrew words in my Strong's, right, and actually see what they were. And Vines, I could look up the Greek and parse the Greek, even though I couldn't speak the Greek. They're just tools to use. And I was really digging in, still very academically, but I was realizing that the things, and I was digging into the culture that Jesus was moving in, and that Jesus was a Jew living in a culture where there were lots of insiders and outsiders, and he was breaking those walls down and getting in trouble all the time for doing that, right? And I wasn't seeing my church do that. We were insulating ourselves from the outsider, saying we're in and they're out. And then I'm watching Jesus talk to the Samaritan woman. I'm watching him choose a tax collector to be one of his disciples. I'm watching him go to a tax collector's house, Zacchaeus, and And it's like, it seemed like the religious leaders were the ones that were constantly in trouble with Jesus, and all the prostitutes, all the outsiders that we would say they're dirty, evil, were the ones that he was dining with, inviting in, talking with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see the church doing that. I didn't see Christianity, my version of Christianity, doing that. We were really interested in insulating ourselves from the bad people and keeping the bad people out and speaking a common language and keeping our tribe intact. And so that carried on into high school, or into college, I would say. That kind of like growing kind of, I was disillusioned a bit, I think. The more I dug into who Christ was and what I saw the church doing, I started to see a split, and I wasn't okay with that cognitive dissonance, even though I had a lot of other places theologically. That one was the one that really was like there's like a tear that started to happen, a rift that started to grow.
It's interesting because
see if there's any place you want to prep there.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting because you mentioned twice the centrality of the character of Jesus as sort of a point, as a litmus test for faith or belief or Christianity. You mentioned it when you go looking at various different pastors, and they all shared a love for Jesus. And now when you saw a dichotomy between what you saw as the message of Jesus and what you saw as the message of the church. And that's a very interesting point. I'm always curious to know what the sort of the central point of someone's belief is, because there's a whole complex of beliefs, and there's things which are more peripheral. And then it takes some work to actually dig down to be like, and it takes actually, encountering conflict and dissonance to actually see what is it that really anchors my belief at bottom. And it's interesting to hear that for you, it was the character and message of Jesus. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I had this, a really relevant to what we're talking about here, experience that may have been, I might consider this my first sort of, it wasn't really quite a mystical experience, but maybe it was. I don't know how to define it. Certainly a spiritual experience. I was 18, right? So I said kind of there's like Chris creeping, kind of like we're missing something. We're saying we believe these things, but we're not doing the core things as far as I could see the core things of being a Christian. Well, it could be more core than moving like Christ moved in the world, right? My uncle was getting married in Miami, so all the family flew down. My dad's younger uncle. So that family is a lot of pastors, right? And certainly a lot of Christians, a lot of either trying to be academic theologians or like lay theologians, right? We spent time debating each other at family reunions, which got old very quick as I matured. And there was a guy that came in, we were eating at a restaurant, and a homeless guy came in. I didn't see him, and my brother came back to the table and said, you should go talk to Leroy in the bathroom, like kind of jokingly. And I was like, who's Leroy? And he was like, there's like a dude in there washing his clothes in the sink. And I said, there's like something kind of like prompted me, pulled me, like, you should go talk. It's like the divine was like, you should go talk to Leroy. And like, and by the way, like the homeless, the impoverished, the downtrodden, like that is like the heart of Christ is with them uniquely. Like the New Testament is so clear that it's unique. Jesus' own words, uniquely clear that he is with the oppressed and the poor.
Yes.
And
it's funny.
So I went in there and I talked to Leroy. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off. I was actually just today reading Matthew 25, where Jesus says that, like, when you fed when you fed the hungry, you fed me. When you clothed the naked, you were clothing me. When you visited the prisoner, you were visiting me. So yeah, right on.
That's the one, man. And that, like, that verse is like, I carry that everywhere with me, man. I can't, if I drive past somebody on the street that I couldn't pull over and do anything about because of traffic, my heart, like that Matthew 25, like grips me. Like, that's Jesus. That's Jesus, though. So I talked to Leroy. Yeah. And I mean, he's a homeless guy in Miami, right? He's not doing great. And I was like, can I just pray for you? And he's like, man, you're the real deal. And I never had anybody talk to me like that about my faith, like I was somehow lining up with it properly. And I said, well, I try to be, like, I try to actually do the thing. This is why I'm bitter about the church, because I don't feel like it's doing the thing. Yeah. And I prayed with them. And then I left the bathroom, and he walked out shortly after me, and it was just like something hit me. And it wasn't even a verse, because there are verses in the Bible that talk about, if you pray for someone and say God be with you, but you don't give them bread, like what's it worth, right? So there's this idea of like we take care of their body and we take care of their soul.
Yeah.
Like we love them and all the different levels we could love them. And I gave him $10 on the way out. And it's so funny. I don't know why I said this, because it's not like, I grew up with juvenile delinquents, so maybe it's a little street savviness, but I said, this isn't for drugs. I said, this is for food, things you need. I put it in his hand, and he was like, looked at me, his eyes are cracked out. He's clearly already stoned. And he looked at me and he was like, oh yeah, I would never do that. I was like, Leroy, I see your eyes, man. I know that, but like, I really want this. I said, this is God's money, and he's watching, spend it wisely. And he was like, all right, his eyes got kind of wide, like, oh, okay, this dude's serious. And he walked out. Now I'm coming back to a table full of Christians, right? Christians that have read the Gospels, they've read the life of Jesus, they know who he's for, they've read Matthew 25. I sit down, and the first thing, this will be the title of the book if I ever write a book, this will be the title of it, that they said, go wash your hands. That's the first thing. They knew I was in there talking to a homeless guy. And the first thing was like, oh, like, now you're dirty. Go wash your hands.
Wow.
And like my soul was just like, it was like a punch to my soul. And then the follow-up was, how much money did he get out of you? And I didn't say anything back. I just sat back like, what? How is this? The body of Christ sitting with me at the table, leaders of churches. How is this our response to someone who got to go and love on somebody who's, not been loved on?
Right.
And that was huge. I told you it was kind of like there's like a little tear happening. That was like the TNT blew up in my soul. And I thought, what's really happening here? Like, what's actually going on that we seem to be making clubs out of a true spiritual movement, right? That is unfolding and that we're called into. Jesus always talks about the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven, depending on what gospel you're reading. And that is not a far out distant idea, right? When John the Baptist is introducing Jesus, he's telling people, repent because the kingdom of God is at hand. And the idea at hand is that it's so close you can touch it. Like, it's right here. Like, get yourself straight because God's right here. The kingdom's right here. We can reach out. We can touch it. And that concept was not in our heart. So it's not in the heart of the church. I don't know if it is still, to be honest with you. And maybe that it's funny. This is the story that came to my mind because I think that was when I became a contemplative. And I don't even think I knew it. I didn't have any language for it at the time.
Right.
But yeah, I think
it's something that shifted inside you.
And then I went to a Christian college, and I got even more mad. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Tell us. That's a really incredible story. It's incredible to hear people still hanging on to like the truest message that religion has to share with us, and not being blinded by all the stuff that gets laid over that obscures that truest of messages. So tell us about your foray into more of an academic Christianity and your time in college, and how that was like and what that did for you.
Yeah, what's interesting is that my academic approach to studying the Bible is what helped me understand all the really important cultural context of what Jesus did. If you just read it, you don't necessarily understand that a Samaritan woman you definitely don't talk to, right? As a Jewish man or as a rabbi, even more so, right? You don't collect a bunch of fishermen to be your disciples for your rabbinical school, right? Like, there's a lot of cultural context that my academic approach to trying to figure out the history of things helped me understand, like, oh, this is even bigger. This is like, Jesus was so radical for his day. Like, it was even more than the 21st century American mind understands, right?
Interesting.
So yeah, then going to school, I had professors that Especially, so I still went to a lot of seminary classes, even though I didn't end up majoring in Bible. I flipped them. My major and my minor I flipped because I didn't want to be a pastor. I just really liked studying the Bible. And I had some friends sway me from continuing to go all the way through my undergrad as a biblical studies major if I didn't want to go on and get my master's of divinity. And so I didn't. So I ended up graduating with an IT major and a Bible minor. But I took a lot of seminary classes along the way. I took Greek, and I learned how much latitude there is in the translator's opinion on how a passage should be translated, at least for the New Testament perspective. I took a class in ancient Near Eastern history and learned about all like the Babylonian and Sumerian epics and the myth and the cosmology, and then juxtaposed against the Israel's. And it was just a lot of really important fundamental kind of probing into the tradition that kind of kicked loose all the remaining elements of a literal reading of the text. Now, I'm not there are people that read the Bible completely as symbol and archetypal language, right? And I don't do that, but I do think there are portions of it that's their proper way to read it. That the story is pulling on archetypal language on purpose for maybe the original audience, but also for us, and that there's the Spirit, what we would call the Holy Spirit in the Christian tradition, is bringing that to you for your modern day context. I think some of it is history too. I think there's there's attempts at capturing history for sure that are in there as well. So I was still even in college trying to figure out where my tradition and the study of this book meets reality. Where do I bring it out? Where do I bring it into my own life? I still didn't really have a spiritual practice at this point in college. It was the best thing I had was still read your Bible and pray every day. You'll grow. And I knew that wasn't really, that was like very childish. Like maybe that's good for a kid, like a young child, but that's not good for somebody who has now spent 2 decades, right? Like studying and doing language studies on their own and trying to figure out like what does, I was focused on orthodoxy, what's the truth, and I think I was starting to get a sense that this should lead to ortho-praxy, like the right way of movement in the world, and I wasn't quite finding all the connections necessarily inside those.
That's an interesting thing that you said just then, that you realize you did not have a spiritual practice, or in retrospect you see that, and I'm curious, as in the seminar or the college in general, was that something which was rare? Were you in the minority for not having spiritual practice, or is that the norm?
The school was very similar to the Baptist denomination. It's called Grace Brethren. They deviated on a few points. One of the big points of contention was when you baptize somebody, do you baptize them once in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit and up, or do you baptize in the name of the Father, up, the Son, up, the Holy Spirit, up? And the other one was pacifism, whether we fight wars as Christians or not. The Grace Brethren didn't believe you did. It's funny how we can't sit next to each other in church because of those 2 points. It's crazy.
The first one seems really monumental.
It was very similar to what which one does?
The first one about the order of dunking.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, look, pacifism's kind of an intense one, but yeah, like baptism, that's crazy. Both of those are just so. I had to write a paper on it actually. It was like ridiculous, but
incredible.
So no, to be honest with you, evangelical Christians don't really have spiritual practices unless you come from a Catholic tradition, right, where there's a lot of liturgy, right, and you might do. Some Catholics might have like icons, right? They might pray to saints, light a candle and do a candle meditation. But I grew up, remember, we were extension of the Reformation. Like Catholics were bad, they were naughty, right? So we most of us didn't have a tradition. Like I'll be honest, contemporary Christian music, I think it exploded because it kind of gave a little bit of like, it was more poppy, but it was kind of a way to bring liturgy into your home or into your car to listen to worship music that spoke your language, right? But it still was nothing like going into a cathedral, right? Or, with the stained glass and like this it's all the architecture is to draw you into awe. It's the whole point, right? You're in a whole place, you're standing in something sacred, and your posture shifts because of the environment that you're walking into, right?
Yeah.
We didn't have that. We didn't have holy water, really. We didn't cross ourselves. None of that. Yeah. So no, I think that's one place that evangelicalism is very starved. Yeah.
Interesting. I want to ask you something, because I hear this often from Protestants in comparison to Catholics, where they talk about how Catholics have, such a rich spiritual tradition and ritual and all of that stuff to evoke the sense of, mysterium and awe. But I'm curious as well, because Protestants do have their own tradition of spirituality and their own mystics. William Law, I think Blake was a Protestant, if I'm not mistaken. Jacob Burma, I think, was a Protestant as well. And I don't want to jump ahead in the story, where I know you did your time and you did discover the Christian mystics, but were none of those mystics present in your teaching, in your Protestant world?
Yeah, I don't even know those names. Even today, I don't know those names.
Wow. Yeah, I gotta say, they're very serious.
I think,
and you should check them out. There really are some very, very serious, phenomenal Protestant mystics, and I think they're worth investigating.
Yeah, no, and I'd love to read them. That would be really interesting. I'd love to read. We had the Quakers, right? The Quakers were they were. I still think that's an incredible branch of Christianity. They do some really interesting work. I mean, they sit and just wait if the Spirit moves you. Like their services are just sitting in a circle in silence. I didn't know that. The place where my parents worked was a Friends. The Friends were like a branch of Quakers.
Yes,
but they were more like mainstream evangelicals than they were like the Quakers that would sit in silence and wait for the Spirit to move whoever to speak.
Yeah.
But when I heard about that, I mean, that was that's awesome. I think that's great. I think, but I'll be honest, even the Catholics that I know, the liturgy for them isn't like a deeply mystical moving thing. A lot of the times they're just, most of the Catholics that I knew were like cultural Catholics. They they didn't understand the history of it or care about the history of it.
Of course. But did you feel like, as a Protestant, that Catholics had, if they wanted to, they had points of access into more of an inner Christian life? I feel like we're at a turning point between when you're encountering both some spiritual, like cognitive dissonance, and then some intellectual cognitive dissonance as well, when you're learning more about the actual context of the Bible and the historical makeup of it and the text. And I feel like we're about to hit like a turning point where you move into more of a contemplative or mystical form of Christianity. So I'm definitely on the edge of my seat.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. So there's not a whole lot to say about college, except for my junior year, I dropped out. Mm-hmm. So I remember the moment still. It's crazy. I'm 35 now, and you think that this would kind of fade a bit, but I was sitting in the coffee shop, and I was overhearing conversations, so much gossip and people just being unkind, and there's a lot of language of like unbelievers and like how, I don't know, it was not language of a compassionate people that were moved to build the kingdom of God, I guess, in my mind. And I remember calling up my mom as I was walking back to my dorm room, and I said, I think I want to go. So there's a missionary that went to Africa. I told you the story a little bit earlier. They're in a country called Burkina Faso. They aren't anymore. They kind of had to leave because Daesh or ISIS is so intensely kind of propagating in the area that it was just not safe for them today. But I said, I want to go stay with John and Tammy. Yeah, I just need to get out of here. And this is crazy. I didn't feel like I had to get out of my college, my Christian college. I felt like I had to get out of the United States. That's literally how I felt. Like this Christian country is embittering me. And I didn't like it. And I still carry some of it with me. Like you called me out earlier properly. You can hear in me that I'm still frustrated. There's a frustration in me
For sure.
towards this kind of way of movement in the world. And it isn't entirely fair. I'll admit it. When we talked about the merits of the Reformation and Luther, and it isn't like, I get why it all happened, but there's like a unique wound maybe you get inside your tradition. I'd be curious to hear if you have a story, or your friends have a similar story too. But there's like a unique wound that you get inside your tradition that maybe carrying it's important, or maybe part of spending the time to let it heal and to come to love those people is part of the deal. Like that's part of your growth as well. So yeah, I went to Burkina Faso for 3 months.
Wow.
And got a whole different perspective on life. And it really shifted me. It was like in a weird way, it was kind of a pilgrimage to a place that I never considered holy and realized it was when I got there. And that was a huge transformation too. It's interesting, Zevi, running through these with you, because these are little fence posts that I never really include in my movement into where I'm at now. They were just kind of fence posts for my life and my general development, but these are real fence posts for truly my spiritual development. So it's really, it's cool, like getting to almost externally process this and realize, oh, that was massive. That was much bigger spiritually than I've been letting it kind of be in my memory.
I love that. I love that line you said, that you went to a place that you didn't think was holy and you found holiness there. That's so beautiful. I'm curious to know how that manifested for you. What did you sense there that was holy, and why was that a shock for you or counterintuitive to you?
At the time, Burkina Faso was the 5th poorest country in the world. Wow. And between 1 and 5, the variance is not much. It's extremely poor. I don't know if it's doing much better now, but so I left to sit and be with and play soccer with, and the African national cup was on while I was there, and I got to sit in the capital city while their neighboring country, Ivory Coast, was playing Cameroon, and it went to shootout, and it was like, it's so weird to think of soccer as a spiritual experience, but it totally is. And Ivory Coast, kind of like a sister country to Burkina, and you got Didier Drogba was playing, who was like their dude, right, against Samuel Eto'o in Cameroon, and it came on the shootout, right, and it was just like when like every shot the city would erupt and the ground would shake. Wow. Like in unison, right? Like everyone at the same time was in it. Wow. And it was just, there was something, it was electric in the air, and the fact that people had nothing by my standards, but their lives were rich, their spirits were full, they loved each other, they cared for each other, they gave generously all the time to people. It drove the missionary nuts, because like this guy had made so much money, and his friend asked him if he can have the money to go buy a TV, and he just gives it to him. He said, why would you do that? You worked hard. Like the American mind is, you worked hard, you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, buy your own TV. And like, they're like, oh no, like, yeah, sure, you can have it. I'll give it to you. Wow. And the generosity, the pureness of soul. I mean, and I'm not trying to fetishize. It's not like everything's perfect in Burkina Faso, but there are specific things that I saw amongst their spiritual leaders, amongst their people that attended the church. Their worship was vibrant. And I just remember looking around and thinking, like, they don't even have shoes, and they're smiling and loving each other and caring for each other. And man, we just don't do that in America. We just don't. We don't even, I don't think we would know how to be that way, in a sense. Almost like we have so much stuff that crowds out our ability to just freely give and just be generous. Or like the expectation is that you will stockpile, right? So you do. Yeah. And everyone knows you can't stockpile. And so there's something else. Like obviously theft is a problem, but thieves are not dealt with kindly because no one has anything. Right. And so I think that was it. That was kind of the transcendent concept that I kind of received while I was there. And at the same time, from a spiritual perspective, I am amongst the least of these. I was living with them. I was playing soccer with them, and that wasn't lost on me, right? And they didn't smell good, right? And they and sometimes they were asking for money and being annoying in certain ways. And at the same time, to see Christ in them. to understand Matthew 25 right here where I was at.
Yeah. I think
the practical application of that isn't something a lot of Christians stretch for. They don't try for that.
Yeah. I think that's really beautiful. I think that's really epic. And I think it's important to mention that, like, it's important not to fetishize poverty and suffering, but at the same time to not see them as less than us or subhuman because they don't have the things we have, and if anything to be able to learn something from them about like what really matters in life and what happiness is really about. And I think in affluent countries we've really forgotten that so deeply. And it reminds me, it's funny that I'm quoting the gospel here again and again, but it reminds me of when Jesus says that like the rich, the rich like will have a hard time getting to heaven as much as like the camel getting through the eye of the needle, loaded with its baggages. And that image of like the weight of materiality stopping us from getting into our own internal heavens is a very interesting idea. And I think it's something which is people are picking up more and more today, where like noticing the actual like psychological weight that our material possessions, like the burdens that they place upon us, and there's something that we can learn from the poor, and perhaps even redistribute some of that so that we can get rid of some of our material weight, and we can get rid of some of their suffering in the process. But that's definitely a very fascinating and definitely a very rich Christian idea there. Yeah,
and there's this concept almost that the way that we care for the poor is that we make them like us, right? And Jesus never really said to do that. He was never saying that go make the poor people rich, or he does talk about selling your stuff and giving it to the poor. He tells that to the rich young ruler, right? That's how he enters the kingdom. He says he keeps the law. What else should I do? Go sell all your stuff and give it to the poor, right? And he couldn't. He goes away sad because, again, it's hard when you have stuff to give it all away.
I think it's part of identity as well.
Unfortunately, that's why it makes it hard. We attach it to ourselves via our egos, right? So it's like we think it's like giving away our arm, but like to your point, it's giving away this psychological anchor that we don't even need. And once you give it away, you'll love it. You'll love it being gone. There was one thing that really latched on to me from a spiritual perspective while I was there. There's a tribe called the Bozos. And the missionaries, we went to a softball game, which is a big deal because the missionaries don't get to do a whole lot of stuff together. All these missionaries from the surrounding countries even played this softball tournament. And the missionary I was staying with went out and played as well. So I was talking to all these missionaries that were in the stands and kind of around in their kids. It was a really cool, kind of interesting environment to be in. And John pointed out this couple, they were old, they could tell they were in the sun, just almost looked like raisins. Their skin was so dark and wrinkled. And he said they had been with the same tribe for 35 years. And not one of them has converted to Christianity. This tribe called the Bozos. And he thought it was ridiculous. There's a verse about casting your pearls before swine, and that was kind of what he labeled that, right? And I just found it interesting. I don't remember casting any judgment in that moment. And as I got older and I feel like I've matured a little bit more spiritually, I think I realized the thing that there's a strange like I felt like I felt a sense of like spiritual maturity from them, and I didn't know why I sensed this, like that they had somehow understood something deeper that I didn't get and John didn't get, right? Because it was about converting numbers, although John resisted that quite a bit because that's, he understood there was, and it's kind of complicated, the numbers game with American Christianity and how many people you've saved, right? But they'd saved zero by those metrics. But I realized as I matured that I think maybe they had understood that Jesus' call wasn't necessarily to make people like you, right? That wasn't the idea. It was like make clones and copies of you that think like you and dance like you and talk like you, right? He walked with people. He walked with people in walks of life that he wasn't allowed to, And I think they got that those missionaries understood that either they had a spiritual experience or intuitively understood that their love for that tribe meant they were going to walk with them until they died, and it was okay. And it was like, I was long past that trip when it dawned on me that maybe they got the gospel better than anybody else did at that softball game, from these Western African countries.
Interesting.
They were just walking with people, and they were doing life with them and loving them on their own terms. And there was something crazy powerful about that.
Wow. So you really got a real chance to experience a very different form of Christianity being practiced outside of its American context and outside of your own community and colleges. Yeah, I actually remember the first time as well when I went on like a mission when I was 20, and I spent 2 years community organizing and teaching in Cape Town in South Africa. Yeah, and it was really fascinating to see other forms of practice and to mix in new crowds and also to encounter like the social and racial and political realities on the ground there. Yeah, so I have a bit of a sense of that experience, what it's like to go from a first world country and to encounter poverty and to encounter the other. And I can see I had a similar experience where I felt very expanded and very changed by the experience. So that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's transformative. I mean, that taking a trip into another culture is a spiritual experience in and of itself. If you have your eyes open, your ears are ready to receive it. It's transformative. And I totally understand pilgrimage now, at least from one dimension of it. The travel and the intention out of where you're going. And I would love to do a real pilgrimage someday, knowing that I'm going to a holy place. I think that would be really, really cool.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. There are a lot of really good pilgrimages that still happen today, and the psychological value in them, they're really huge. These things really were done for a reason. People weren't just like getting up and walking for like hundreds of miles for fun. Like there was real spiritual and psychological like value and output that these practices had. So you come back from Africa, you come back and I'm sure in many ways you're changed, you're a new person with new perspectives. I'm curious to know how that vibes with your family back home, with your community back home, and what that means for your journey going forward.
Yeah, it didn't really help me. It gave me a break and a new perspective, but I still had a very kind of cynical heart towards my own faith tradition, that I had this sense that I was leaving behind. And the part of it that even to this day I don't like when I feel into it is that I don't think that I'm like a better person than somebody who's still inside of like a more fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. But I catch myself thinking that way from time to time, and it really bothers me. And I didn't want to come back and as if I was like a guru now, or that I had been I'd transcended somehow. And this trip had maybe something that no one could understand or they couldn't understand. And so I came back. I enrolled back in school. I kind of kept my head down and graduated and got married. And I mean, I feel like at that point, my whole life perspective shifted, because then now I have a wife, and it wasn't that long after that I had my first son, right? And so my life, I think, became very practical in a lot of ways after that. I went to a church that was very kind of hipstery, very fringe, and like a hipstery kind of a church. We collected a lot of people on the fringe that were kind of on their way out of Christianity, or like maybe like kind of feel their way in if they thought like it was a thing for them. And that kind of became my identity as sort of a Christian on the edge. I got more vocal around kind of the non-literal reading of things and, like controversial things for a fundamentalist perspective that, Noah's Ark probably didn't actually happen. This was a mythic story told by many different cultures to talk about a divine truth, right? And I got more vocal. I cared less about people that thought that I was a heretic for believing these things. So that all happened for sure. But as you have kids, then it gets tricky because they're going to go to Sunday school. I want them to grow up in the church, right? And so there's a lot of trickiness around how do I engage in spiritual community, holding the beliefs that I have, living in the Midwest, where I'm not going to find a church that completely vibes with the things that I'm saying. But I can be in churches that will let me sit alongside them, which is great. So that gets, and then I think, what am I going to pass to my kids? What's the tradition I give to them, right? And that becomes important as well.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of that kind of put on I want to exemplify to them. I don't want to tell them what to think. I want them to see me do it and want it as well, right? And to see that it's a way of movement in the world that is, I don't know if transcendence is the right word, but is desirable, that it's good, that it doesn't just bring you joy, but it has a higher purpose, right? Like there's something, we come out, like if you're walking out the door and you're thinking like, where is Christ out here in the poor that are out here? Where is their kingdom work to happen today? You're coming at life from a different perspective, right?
Absolutely.
Than if you're just trudging through trying to work your 9 to 5, you know? So I got more serious around what does that look like? How do I impart this? How do I do it myself as an example? And what do I do when I screw up? Because I just kept screwing up. Yeah. I'm trying to think where like the right way to take the story is from here. So there's a lot about the doctrine of hell that was tricky for me, that I felt like I had to let it go because of the psychological. I will straight up say the doctrine of hell really caused me psychological damage. And I really spent a lot of time academically. Internally, it just didn't seem like it worked at all. Right? I experienced the love of God, and it just didn't seem like this could be the idea of eternal conscious torment, if I'm being really like careful with my language, right? That God's going to burn people that don't align themselves either through a special prayer or through certain actions. It just seemed so untenable when you look at the character of Christ. It just didn't. I just didn't see it. I didn't understand how it worked. But all the verses I was given so many verses, theological constructs. I said, well, then what do you do with these? And I think that kind of got me started looking outside of my faith tradition. Well, what do other people believe? What do other faith traditions believe around the doctrine of hell? And and that started moving me into some of these contemplative, the Desert Fathers and Mothers and the contemplative tradition. I started stumbling into N.T. Wright, if you're familiar with N.T. Wright. He has a great book called Surprised by Hope. That was sort of my inlet to a more gracious, maybe a more optimistic way that that the Christian story ends, so to speak, right? Not with most of the population burning for eternity. And I think that opened up a lot of options for me, because I realized, I have latitude here. Just like my dad was trying to give me his tradition, now I get to pick the tradition that I want to perpetuate down to my kids. And so there was a measure of weight to me, but there was also the sense of freedom as well. So there was job changes and all kinds of stuff in the mix there, but eventually I came to Richard Rohr, and that was in Rohr. He's a Franciscan, ironically coming out of the Protestant traditions. I come back to a Catholic. How funny is that? And it's funny because he's still a fringe Catholic, and he talks about what it looks like to be a Christian on the edge. Like he was speaking the language that I kind of felt like my arc of my life had sort of been doing anyway. I kept asking questions ever since I was in youth group. I was asking questions and people were looking at me sideways. Like, why are you questioning that? And here's a group of people that are kind of questioning it. And there's a podcast called The Liturgists. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I've heard some of their episodes. Yes.
Okay. So I've been a Patreon of theirs since they opened their Patreon up.
Amazing.
And they were important too. It's actually one of the places I heard Rohr first. I think I heard him once outside of that, but they interviewed him in some of the earlier season 1 or season 2. And Pete Enns is another one they interviewed too. He's a Hebrew scholar out of Harvard. They got kicked out of Westminster Theological Seminary, and started reading his books. So it's almost like there was like a crack open, and then things, from the church, my initial in high school, going to a different school that was a different branch, to youth group at a different type of church, to going Sunday morning to a different kind of church. That trend seemed to continue outwards, right? And I kept getting this wider and more expansive view of what Christians believed, whether they were academics like Pete Enns or they were contemplatives like Richard Rohr. And the more I did the academic study, the more I felt untethered from some of the more oppressive theological constructs that I felt like kept me down.
Well said.
The more I learned about Christian contemplative, the more I moved in the more Christian contemplative practice, the more I felt like spiritual freedom, not like intellectual freedom from theological content. But I realized that all of this talk of connecting with the divine is not nonsense, which I grew up thinking. The charismatics were just whipped up into an emotional frenzy. They weren't really connecting with the divine. And then here I am, and it was in this time frame that I had my first mystical experience that's just like irrefutable. And I call it, if you don't mind me dropping an F-bomb, it's weird. It's such a strange lead into my mystical experience, but I call it my fuck you anchor, right? So it was an experience such that I can't write it off. The explanation wasn't like right in my face to why it would have been delivered to me in the way that it did, the form it did, why it happened. But I also can't write it off and say I thought I had a brain tumor, right? Wow. And I was like literally on like WebMD, like I was looking at symptoms, having a brain tumor or something. Like, how could I see this? How could these things? I don't like talking about it in detail, but it was something that involved my body and the space that I was in happening at the same time, and it was connected uniquely to the Christian idea of Trinity. I was reading a book by Richard Rohr called The Divine Dance, and it's about why the archetypal image of the Trinity is so important for us to understand spiritually, that the Father gives the Son, and the Son freely gives the Spirit, and the Spirit connects us as the enigmatic fourth person of the Trinity back to the Father, right? And so there's this free relational giving even inside of the divine oneness that we get invited into the flow as well. And it's so funny you mentioned Matthew 25. It's such a core tenet of my life. As I was thinking about that, I was thinking of Matthew 25. Oh, this is why Christ is in the poor. This is why we aren't just created in the image of the divine. That's not the end of it. The divine permeates this thing. We are inside of, and it's bigger, right? It's this free-flowing, giving fountain of itself in these different relational pieces or portions of it, tying us back into this divine flow. And as this is like hitting me, this mystical experience comes up and out. And it's truly Old Testament. I literally fell forward on my face. Wow. This face, and it wasn't, I didn't think about it. It was like my body knew how to respond to this type of a thing. It was totally automatic. And I just fell on my face, and all I could say was thank you over and over and over. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't even know what I was saying thank you for. It was it was very mind blowing, to say the least. And it was in this place where I was kind of untethering myself potentially from my Christian faith, because there was a lot of theological untying, and you can just keep with that deconstruction. You can just kind of keep deconstructing until you don't really have I wanted to stay spiritual because I had the sense of the divine, but I didn't know what it would look like. But this tied me uniquely to Christ again. It tied me back to Christ, back to this, like the Christian idea of Trinity. And shortly after that, I had 3 different visions that also tied me back to Christ. And that was it. It was like that month was like dense with this spiritual activity that I'd never experienced. It's hard to explain. It's nearly ineffable. I've tried to explain it to people in the past, especially the vision. That vision, it kind of evolved. It was a little bit different every time it happened. But every time I say it, it's like it turns to ash. It's like when I try to give it to someone, it's like my spirit saying like, that's for you. That's for you. Like, you don't need to give that away. That's for you. And I tried, and it just, something about it that's why I'd rather be vague with it. It's not because I think it's a deep esoteric secret and I'm like some transcendent being. It's that I have a unique sense at this point that it was for me. And then once that happened, I was like, all right, these contemplatives, these mystics, they're onto something. They aren't writing nonsense for book sales, you know?
Yeah.
And everything, and then it was a huge cracking open again, like another layer opening up that had started so long ago. And honestly, it's probably why I'm talking to you, because the mystics, the Christian mystics, were the ones that went and sat, like Rohr went and sat with the Zen Buddhists, right? Merton did similarly.
Yeah.
Like they often did interfaith because the mystic recognizes the mystic heart regardless of the tradition.
Yeah.
And that's so fascinating to me, because since this thing had happened, that had a lot of people wander into my life from different spiritual walks of life. And I'm not at a point where like old me would have to evangelize. I'd have to evangelize you and convince you to my way. And now it's like, what do you have to teach me? I want to hear your thing. I want to hear what you're learning. What are you hearing from the divine? What's your practice bringing up, right?
Wow, what an incredible shift.
It's almost like I'm to glean their truth from them. I almost don't want to talk. Like even this, I'm telling my story, so it's good. But if you were to tell me a deep spiritual truth, I'd be like, you first. I want to hear yours first. You know? I don't have anything to teach you.
Wow, what a good paradigm. One of my own like spiritual teachers, he said that he shifted from a place of spiritual superiority to spiritual voyeurism, where it wasn't about like I have it and I have it right, but like other people are also getting it on with God, and I want to go and watch and learn and like bring that back to my own relationship and see what I could improve.
Oh, spiritual voyeurism. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
And also just...
I do. I feel like that. And sometimes I feel like freaking people out sometimes. Even in normal conversations, I get a sense of something spiritual, and I'll poke into it. And it's like, dude, I met you 10 minutes ago. What are you asking about relationship with God?
Right. It's super personal, it's super intense. Yeah. But I'll do that. I'll like literally watch people pray and just like take like small things from their prayer, from their practice, and be like, wow, that was like that movement, or like that like preparation, or that I just want to say for like the skeptical listeners, because like this is, a channel which is about, philosophy, and it's also like, rational and everything. I think when people will like follow you up until a certain point, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well in sharing your story, but as soon as you mention like mystical experience, they'll be like, okay, that's like, you've just hit the deep end for me. That's like, I can go up until there, but no further. It's like there's a couple like red flags or words which people just like, they're open-minded up until that point. And for anyone, I used to think like that. And I would recommend for anyone that is listening to the conversation now and is feeling that way, and like had the grace to continue listening and not just leave right away, I would recommend reading The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, because that is a book by a very serious thinker, one of the founding, intellectuals of American pragmatism and American psychology, who like looks at the actual evidence of mystical experiences across history, across traditions. And he comes to some very interesting conclusions. And so the notion of just discounting someone else's firsthand experience just because it's something which is ineffable or we can't conceptualize, I think it's a very closed-minded thing to do. And that's my number one book recommended if anyone is like struggling with that point in the conversation.
Give me the title one more time. You broke out for a sec, but I think I want to read it.
Yeah, definitely. It's The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James.
Varieties of Religious. Okay, great.
And specifically has like one or two specific chapters on mysticism, and it's a phenomenal book. It's also like intellectually, it's a world-class book. Who was it? Ludwig Wittgenstein. Who was one of the smartest men in the past century. They called him the philosopher's philosopher. Was said to have like kept a copy of the Varieties on his desk at all times. Like this is not some sort of like light book to be dismissed easily.
I know, yeah. Well, look, when I had that experience, my faith tradition didn't have a lot of answers for me, so I went all over the place.
Interesting.
And the tradition that seemed to have something to say to me. I was on internet forums, I was on Reddit, I was DMing people, like, and the guy who got back to me was a qigong trainer from, I don't know where he was at. I think he was European, I think, but was practicing in East Asia somewhere.
I don't know what qigong is.
He said it was qi. Qigong. So are you familiar with Tai Chi?
Yes.
So it's akin to Tai Chi. I don't know what it's a martial art, an Eastern martial art that's really more about energy movement, right? And so it's sort of like yoga a little bit. You do different postures and movements, but you're fostering your chi, your life force. You're building it up inside of you. So it's really not about fighting as much as it's about these movements that build up this life force energy. And he said what I had described sounded like an outpouring of chi. And which is fascinating. He was the only one that had it. And he was describing, did it look like this? Did it feel like this? And I was just like, were your hands involved? Like, yeah, man, like this is crazy that you're described like through this martial art or an art form that I'm not even familiar with at all. But he seemed to understand something of life force. Or again, you have skeptics, so now I sound even crazier. But that was one of the guys that hit me back that I thought he actually might know something about this.
I really do think that like chi is just one word in one tradition for like the same thing in many other traditions, whether that's like prana or like it's I don't
prana.
Think, so this is actually a really good segue back into your own journey. So you have this mind-blowing experience, and then you have these visions over the course of the month. And I'm really curious to know, I'm super fascinated by the intersection between these experiences and religious traditions. So you told me that you're struggling to find a way to make sense of it within your own tradition. I'm so curious to know what that struggle looked like, how it manifested, what you did find, what guidance came. I'd be really curious to continue from that point.
What was the struggle? Can you reframe that real quick?
The struggle of having had these tremendous, like, mind-blowing experiences, and then coming back to your own religion, to your own tradition, and being like, how can I make sense based on my own, upbringing and values, and where do I turn for meaning for what just happened to me?
Yeah, there's a lot. First off, of experience like that. If you don't think you're going insane, or you don't have a brain tumor or something, a physical thing to explain what just happened, it puts you in a weird spot. It kind of puts you on you kind of feel a little bit crazy, even though you know it happened. Again, I called it my fuck you anchor, because anytime I tried to write it off, it's just so viscerally there and so undeniably there that I had to deal with it. There was nothing to do but deal with it. And there's no way to deal with that without looking that it was anchored to a spiritual truth. Right. And understanding a spiritual truth I grew up with, but I didn't understand at that level, to that measure. So yeah, I tried to tell my dad, and I broke down crying and felt like a crazy person. I wasn't a big crier at the time. As I moved into this, my heart has opened up a lot more. I'm actually a lot more, I allow my emotions out more than I ever have in my life. I'm very cerebral, very up in my head. So a lot of the stuff physically happened to me. I shifted. My wife noticed I was different. I was more receptive. I was more present. So there were people that came up to me, including my dad, that said, I know something for real happened. I just don't understand it. I don't know. And then there's this other thing that happened. And my dad was the first contact point I had for this, where I explained it. And he said, why would that happen for you and not happen for me? And my heart just sunk when I heard that, because that's a good question. And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know why. I have no clue why. And it really helped me rethink whether this was a thing to share, not just because I would look like a crazy person, but because people who are more spiritually inclined will ask that question. Even if they don't say it out loud, they will wonder it internally. And I didn't want people to feel like somehow they were uniquely, like they were broken or not connected the way that I was, because I don't think that's true. I don't think that's why. I don't think it was like a gift because I'd got things right. I just don't know what it was. Even to this day, I don't know why it was. And so it's a bit of an alienating thing, because there's a story that I have this huge, incredibly pivotal thing that happened to me, that even people I'm really close with now, we've moved down here. I'm in Florida now. I go to a church that's awesome, gets orthopraxy, gets service and love of people down so well. And I'm very close with my pastor. I told my spiritual director, but he's out in California and totally disconnected from my community. So it's easy for me to tell my spiritual director because, he's not connected to the community here. But people connected to my community, it's very hard to navigate whether I share it or not, because I don't want people to feel like I have something they don't. I think that's crazy. I don't want to give my ego any fuel, period, right? I know what it can do with this type of a thing. And it can just be for me, and that can be okay. And so what's happened is, as I've let that sit and be and resist the urge to try to share it or yell it from the mountaintops, which is very extreme after it happens immediately, I realized this idea settled on me that reality isn't as tame as we think it is, right? It's not as simple. It's not this all the time, the simple, straightforward interacting. Sometimes crazy things happen that we can't explain. And the mystics are really just documenting this in their literature, right? They're talking about their inner experience of the inner world, things that happen to them, like ecstasies that unfolded for them, divine encounters. And the thing is, they seem to be fringe enough that most of us can write them off as crazy. But if you step into that world, all of a sudden you realize, like, oh, all right, so reality's looks like this most of the time, but occasionally it breaks the rules. I guess. What else do you say? Like, I feel like that's a reasonable synthesis. It's probably not all of it, but that's a piece of it, is that the rules that govern this thing are true most of the time. We can measure them, test them, the scientific method, and it works for most of the time. But there are things that we don't know how to measure. And there are things that happen that we can't just make re-happen through some sort of clinical methodology. And so that's still burning. That piece is still kind of a slow burn, because I am a very high-headed person. I'm a technical person. I'm in a technical field. I'm a technology guy. And so, like, methodology, studying things, data, and metrics is that's how I make my money. It's how I provide for my family. And yet here I have this whole other experience saying that's true for reality most of the time, but also this other thing happens. So, like, again, what does it mean? Maybe, I don't know if there's a grander way, a higher order way of lumping this together. But so far, that's where I'm at. And that, again, I see myself moving to the fringes, and I'm not comfortable there. I'm there, right there. I'm talking about this openly right now. This is a test and a stretching of myself for sure, because people will watch this. They'll think I'm nuts. And I'm trying to get okay with letting what is be, because I'm not lying to anybody about my experiences. And you are trying to have these conversations, right? So you kind of coaxed me out a bit. And it's like, yeah, okay, let's have these conversations. Let's just have it out, Yeah. And I think there are more people that have had similar things or intimations of things, even if it's not exactly the same, that they feel like they're put on the fringe as well. And if they can feel a little bit more like there's a community that's like, no, like, this is a thing that happens. You're not crazy. And even if we're the fringe for most of the place, maybe we can come together here, as a place for some solidarity, maybe,
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, at the end of the day, all of this has done is crack open my idea of who are insiders and who are outsiders from what I was taught as a child to now. Is all that's happened is my love has expanded, right? My idea of the divine has expanded. It's become this bigger, broader, more inclusive thing. So I don't know. My Christian friends will think I'm crazy. My atheist friends definitely think I'm crazy. And it's like you're kind of in your own little ecosystem with this type of experience.
Yeah. I totally get you. And firstly, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience with us, despite what people may think about it. And I think the point that you made there just at the end is such a true point. And it's actually, funnily enough, the same point that William James makes. James spends much of his book trying to ascertain whether we can prove the truth, the veridicality of these experiences. And he ends up dismissing that project, and he says, no, we can't make any sort of broad metaphysical or even epistemological claims here. But
he says, if we could look at the fruits of these great men and women throughout history, the mystics, he says, were perpetually the vanguards of morality. They were the people who taught us how to live the best lives, the people who showed us the way forward and drove humanity in direction of peace and unity and love. And in the end of the day, he says that the question of like whether this is real or whether it's not real, he actually brackets that question entirely. He says that's actually not something which he feels like we can't answer that question. He's agnostic about that. But what does it do in our lived lives, in our lived experiences? And I think this is so important. I think this is where mysticism is different than other forms of things which are dismissed as irrational or non-scientific. Where there are so many like crazy things, and people experience, you know, UFO, alien abductions, and this and that, and there's a million things that happen to people that are inexplicable. But when I look at the results of those communities and of those individuals that go through those experiences, where does it lead them to? And if it leads them to a place of infinite love and acceptance and breaking down of boundaries and compassion and goodness and real like depth of meaning and happiness, then like in a way the metaphor, the like sort of the logical and the philosophical questions, those can all wait, and we can try to cultivate the best of humanity through these communities and through these practices. Yeah, and I think that's like very, very apparent in your story where you saw that happen in your own life, and the importance of then finding people that have gone through some experiences and asking ourselves collectively, how do we grow? And this is the next question I want to follow up with, which is these experiences do break the mold of our own traditions and our own communities, and the question is then, how do we go forward and create our own structures of community and tradition and practice going forward, so that our mysticism doesn't just drift into some sort of, you know, egoic, narcissistic, hedonistic, which happens in the history of mysticism. People like really just go off into wild orgies until the end of their days. And so I'm curious to know your own process and where you've seen success and challenges in bringing these experiences back in and grounding them and reading them through your own wisdom traditions and what you found in the Christian contemplative tradition.
Yeah. So part of those, the visions, I had those 3 visions I said, a really central part of it was Christ telling me to feed his people. He said, feed my people. And every time I would respond, I'll do whatever you want. Just tell me how to do it. Show me how to do it. Right. Just give me the tools. Tell me the thing. And he would whisper in my ear every time, my son, you already have what you need. And that message has echoed out in my life, because every time I feel like I'm taking something on that I can't handle, or more importantly, like when I pray with my boys, we pray for like the eyes to see the ways that the kingdom needs to unfold. Like what's our kingdom work that's coming up? We want to be awake. We don't want to be staring at our phones like zombies, right? We want to be awake and alert. Who's in need? Who's in hurt? Who's been put in our path, right? Who are we stepping over that we should be kneeling down and picking up? It's a different posture. That experience is so embedded in me that you can be awake or you can be asleep, right? You can feed the people, right? Or you can just ignore them. If you've ever been to San Francisco, you're stepping over homeless people literally. They're literally ignoring people, right? So that's like a very physical way, but there's so many spiritual ways that we ignore each other. We don't ask that question. That person's hard to deal with. We just stay away from them, right? And so for me, it was this catalyst into orthopraxy. Like I've said this with you maybe a few times. It used to be how do I hold the right ideas? These experiences have drawn me into how do I enter that flow, right? The concept of entering the flow with the divine. How do I feed the people? Right? What do I do? How do I move? How do I stay alert? How do I keep myself from falling asleep to this call, to this important piece of being a human? I mean, this is core humanity.
Yeah.
And I tell my wife this every now and again, as we kind of question, like, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? Why are we making those decisions, whether it's a country scale or a little community or globally, whatever? And this idea, I just thought this phrase keeps coming up. We don't know what we are. We do that because we don't know what we are. We don't understand what it means to be in the image of the divine, or we wouldn't be doing that thing. We wouldn't be hurting those people. We wouldn't be robbing the land from those indigenous peoples. You know, we wouldn't be pouring oil into the oceans. You know, we wouldn't be allowing this poverty to stand up while we live in mansions in other areas, right? We don't know. We're asleep to the thing that we are. And the mystics, the contemplatives, for me, call me into remembering what we are. They are telling us the story through all these different traditions of what you are, right? And what we're called into. That there is this union can be experienced, but it also is like the activator for the. It's weird, we talk about humanity almost in a negative term. The divine, beautiful piece of humanity that steps forward and pulls us in, reminds us what we are. Like the prophets of the Old Testament, maybe like are very similar to the mystics of the traditions that we have. Some living now, even, but some of the mystics that we read, like Teresa of Avalon, and it's sometimes, like in her case, they're just helping you understand your landscape. Like Interior Castle is just understanding what you are, right? But it's still tied to this story of what we are isn't just meat bags checking in and checking out of work, right? We can do that. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but there's layers to what we are. And these deeper layers, like the Interior Castle talks about your soul structure, right? And there's the mystics are kind of calling us into that depth that we were created and made for. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what comes up for me.
That's such a beautiful idea. And I find that idea really across traditions. I was actually just talking today with a Muslim fellow just in through the channel. And we were talking about how like the idea of the prophet in Islam is to practice zikr for the people, which means it's the same cognate as zikaron in Hebrew, or zachar, which is to remind them of who they really are. It's like stop forgetting, stop forget and remember like who you really are. Remember that you're like just really part of the divine. And that idea of remembering who we really are, that's such a powerful idea. And I love that notion that it is the mystics who are like the wake up calls, or the alarms that wake us up because it's so easy to drift back into our old ways of thinking, into like our separate, selves and egoic personalities, and we definitely need those perpetual reminders. I'm curious to know, what was this experience like for your wife? How did it manifest in your relationship?
Yeah. We went through a really tough spot where we almost got divorced because I was so not present. I was very focused on my career, and I would come home and I would, have a couple glasses of scotch and play video games down in my study. We had a really nice finished basement, and I would stay on there, and I would convince myself I'm working hard for the family so we can have like this nice house, live in this nice place, and I'm spending my energy, so I deserve to have my own time. But that own time was like all the way up till the kids went to bed, right? And so I was like missing out on life because I was pouring all of my energy into like all these egoic things. Like, you're building your career, you're doing it for them. I was doing it for me, right? I was just masking it in some way. And then I was withdrawing from the people that I loved the most. And so these experiences drew me back into presence. Like, there was almost no way to do it. As a matter of fact, a sort of, I don't know, transcendent type of thing that I don't know if I've ever encountered, except for maybe falling prostrate during that mystical experience, was I was reading through this devotional book, Everything Belongs, Richard Rohr wrote. It's really, really good. And this thought just hit me. I don't even remember if it was tied to the words on the page, but it was just like, stand up, so I just stood up, and then I just like go downstairs. So I went downstairs, and it was like, start unplugging your PC. And I just started unplugging all the cords, and I started weeping while I was doing it. And I picked it up and I took it out to the garage and I set it down in the garage. And it was like, that thing was robbing your presence. I mean, it was you using it that way, but that having that disconnected will shift things. And so I think if she were here to ask, that would be a huge turning point, because I recognized this thing that I was using as a stumbling block to being present and engaged with the people I love the most, right? And that computer, by the way, we've moved 3 times since then. It's always been in the garage. It's still in my garage right now. And I haven't done that consciously, but it's such a good reminder, right? That like, and there's new patterns that will emerge. Like the ego's smart, and there's ways you're going to convince yourself. For me, I withdraw. That's my thing. And but it's a good reminder that you can be vigilant and you can be dialed in and connected, and you can find your way back into fullness of life. And I would say that's been the benefit, not just to my wife, but to my family and my community at large, because once I removed kind of the distraction, and there's nothing wrong with gaming, by the way, if anyone's watching this, like I still game, I love it. But there was a lack of balance, right? It was a way for me to escape reality. That's what tips over, right? Whether it's movies, books, video games, whatever, you're escaping reality and you're missing it. You're missing out on the fullness of life. And I think that is huge. When you go from being withdrawn to being present and trying to find out, how can I be engaged? How can I have this conversation? How can I draw more out of this? And then I had more energy and time. So I got more involved in my community, got more involved with my church. Down here, I volunteer with the youth group. I love the middle schoolers. They're the most awkward age ever. They're hilarious. They're, and they're trying to sort their way through life. And so it's really just more like being a mentor. There's not a whole lot of heavy spiritual stuff you do at that age, but just kind of hanging out, how are things going, learning about the new trends and the crazy TikTok videos and all of that. And it just, again, it's like it replicates itself. It pulls you in and it pulls you in further, and you learn something new and you build a relationship with this kid. And then that kid wants to call you because he's having trouble at school. And it's like, all of a sudden, like now you're in the flow, right? Now you're in this loving flow of connectivity with your community, with people, right? So I think that my family felt that first. So I think that ripples out.
Nice. Yeah, Steve, that's so nice. I try not like complimenting people too often, because I think sometimes it's like it doesn't always do the right thing spiritually to people. But you just have like such a real sense of like genuine, like down to earth and good humor, and like a real sense of like what's important in life and the values. And it's just such a pleasure to see someone really like embodying that and living it to the best of their capacity. Firstly. And
I appreciate that, and I just want to be clear. I real quick, I skipped over a lot of the ass kickings I got along the way, right? So it's really important. I don't want this to be lost. The suffering that I basically made a little footnote. We almost got divorced. That sucked. That hurt, right? And I was a big catalyst. I mean, it was always more than one side. But my point is, if you can take your suffering as grace, right? That's trying to correct and move you in a certain direction, instead of just throwing in the towel and saying, well, fuck it, life sucks, it's over, right? Like, I can't get it right, whatever. Then I think this is what it looks like to let that suffering mold and shape you. It can look like this, I guess. And I don't always do it right. Like I'll suffer and do it wrong. I'm positive of it, you know? I'm only 35. There's plenty more years to screw up more. For sure. But there's this grace that's embedded in reality that is always this. I love the, I'll say it wrong. I love the Hebrew root word, teshuva.
Yeah, you said it like really good, actually.
The coming back. Yeah, man. Thanks. I feel like that is like embedded in reality.
What is that?
Embedded in reality.
Metatonia in Latin?
Yeah, is it? Is that the same word?
It is. I think it's the same. That's such a nice idea.
I go right to the Hebrew. I skip right over that.
Good man. I feel that's so funny. That idea that Shuva is embedded in reality. That there's almost like a tide, or like a tide in nature that pulls things back to their proper course. That things can deviate and things can go wrong, but like the gravity like brings things back gently back to where it's supposed to be. I love that idea. And it's actually an idea which is like spoken about in Jewish sources, where because the world begins in a state of paradise before the fall, before the sin, of Abrahamic religions, that the natural state of being is paradisical, and therefore the tide of things is to return back to paradise. That the tend is towards heaven and not towards hell. That's that's embedded into the substructure of reality, which is such a beautiful idea. And it's so nice to see that in our own lives.
Yeah.
I'm being like quite self-conscious now of like, and this is part of the downfall of doing something recorded, that you can't just entirely be present, but it's also like a different level of presence. I'm thinking about like how we may be coming across as like just like super spiritually woke, and like we got it and we figured it all out, and like we're just like beings of light, just shining grace and goodness. And I want to therefore ask you, like, tell us about like the times where you mess up and the times where like you really fuck up and that's not what it looks like, and how you get back to be where you want to be.
I try to drop a few F-bombs just to level set there.
Good.
Yeah, man. Look, I screw up all the time. Like this tendency to withdraw, like it can get real bad, right? To like, we got to do major corrective action. And there's all these little ways that I'm not actually here, right? I'm not paying attention. I'm not, I lead a team at my work too. And like, there's ways I can show up better for them and show up worse for them. There's all kinds of ways I withdraw too. Like even, to this day, it's like, do I need another glass of wine? Is this, because there's a chemical ways of withdrawing. There's physical ways of withdrawing. There's electronic ways of withdrawing.
Yes.
And that is like the thorn in my side, the bane of my existence, is that I want to engage fully, but I'm also kind of freaked out about what life will demand of me. Will I have the energy that I need? Do I have in me what it takes to fully engage? What happens if I take on too much responsibility and I can't hold it all up? What if I fail? There's a huge failure for me. So it's every day. Every day is that's what I'm saying. This is what the beauty of this, of grace being kind of embedded in reality, is that I use it every single day. I need it every day because I'm constantly falling short. I wish I was more engaged with my family than I am. I wish I wasn't annoyed at my 30-minute conversation with my 6-year-old. I wish I was just in ecstasy at having it. And it's just not it, because I'm not this enlightened, woke being that's just floating around, Earth. I'm trying to deal with this insane spiritual development. I'm trying to lead a highly, super smart, highly technical team in one of the biggest consulting firms in the world. I'm trying to be involved in my community, and I'm trying to help friends that are in different countries doing really interesting work with some of my tech knowledge as kind of an aside, almost like a charity type of a thing. And all of it, in all the ways I'm slacking in some way or the other. I can tell you I should be way further along than here. I was lazy here. I didn't do enough here. Whatever, I don't know. Like it's, for me, there's always this tension with relaxing and sitting back and like restoring my energy, right? Like I always feel like I need more recharge time, and that's just sloth, man. It's just that I just don't want to get up and move in the world. I want to read another book before I move. I don't have enough knowledge yet, but I don't have enough of this, so I need more of that, so that's every day. That's, in a sense, I want to say it's like every moment. I'm just not conscious of it every moment because I slip into it and I believe it,
That's really honest.
Was that enough? Was that enough recall?
Yeah, I think we brought ourselves back to human function. That's super honest, and it's a super real confession, and I super resonate with that as well. And there's definitely so many moments, interactions with people where like I don't live up to what I would have expected from that. And now, try and bring the vibe up a little. What do you do when you find yourself in a slump, in a space where you're finding yourself, being pulled into narratives that you don't want to believe in, or into patterns that you don't want to be practicing? What are the ways? What are the tips, the tricks that you get yourself, re-inspired, if that's the right word?
It's like, well, typically for me, it's motivation, right? Like, I actually last November finally bit the bullet. I knew I'd struggled with depression for a while, but I was formally diagnosed with major depressive disorder, which is an interesting juxtaposition to a lot of the story that you just heard. But it's true. I go through like a seasonal episode of depression. And again, that's more energy stuff too, right? Like just being depleted of any, including motivation to get up and out. But the thing that helps me when I'm in that state, the thing that helps me isn't more thinking, right? Usually my mind's already raced. I've already read all of the Wikipedia pages and WebMD or whatever I'm doing, right? Or got all the books off Amazon delivered already. The thing that helps me kick out the best, I don't do it enough, but I know it's the thing that helps, is to get into my body. So if I go for a run or I do some yoga, I actually started doing Tai Chi. We talked about that earlier. I started doing Tai Chi with my boys. We have a channel we can do lessons on the TV, and we sit in the living room and do our katas, do our flows. But getting in my body is super important. And if I can put a plug in here, when and if you want to talk about the Enneagram, it does help call this stuff out, right? It helps you understand where you're kind of starved and where you need to stretch and move yourself into to move into more growth. And for me, I'm so cerebral and up in my head that sometimes I just need to take action. I just got to get my body moving. Or even if I do a short run, like just like a mile run, like it will shift me enough. And there's physiological things, right? We know exercise releases dopamine. There's a lot of really good reasons if you already have struggle with depression to exercise, right? But there's also this other idea that I'm one that sits back and consumes and observes from a distance and doesn't take action in the world, and just getting up and taking action helps. And sometimes that's just checking some things off of a list, right? Send those emails, vacuum the carpet, do those dishes, right? Spend 20 minutes checking some things off, moving action, right? It doesn't have to be exercise. For me, when I find myself kind of in a slump, it's because I've convinced myself I have so little energy I can't do anything, and then all the tasks that need to happen pile up. And then I start to think about the task tomorrow that might pile up. And all of a sudden I have all this, I call it psychic weight, all the psychic weight of everything that I have to do. Like sometimes it's out like for 6 months that I'm thinking about. And because it weighs so much, I feel like I can't move at all. Whereas if I just think about what I have to do for the next 30 minutes, that's easy. Right. So that helps me. There's like a reframing, and then there's that action component that's very useful for my specific kind of personality type. It's very useful.
Yeah, that's actually super good advice. I know that like for me and for a lot of like my own community, like the Jewish community is like known, like stereotyped as being like hyper intellectual and very much not in their bodies, you know, like the caricature of the Jew who's like the big head and the scrawny body, and the need to return to the physical, to return to the body is so huge, and I think that's happening. I see that in my own community. I see people moving into physical well-being, into better eating, into better practice, into better sleep, better exercise. And I think that's a super big part. I think a lot of spirituality as well, historically, was divorced from the body. And a big tone today is return to the body. And this is another important. Yeah, it's huge. It's so huge. And I like that idea of reframing about thinking what needs to be done in the present, not thinking about what needs to be done 6 months out. That's also really cool. One of my friends who helps me a tremendous amount with this project, with the channel, they do like all of my design and all of my social media and all of that. When they heard like about the conversation we had last time, and I mentioned Enneagrams, they were like so excited with Enneagrams, and they were like, "Oh, I need to talk to Steve. I need to find out my number." And out of like all the things that came to the conversation, it was like the thing which I was like the most skeptical about. So we're probably gonna have to reschedule for like a full session to just for her, so that we can go through it, and maybe she'll join us in the conversation, and she'll be able to.
What we should do is I'll get you a code. And I'll get your producer a code, and maybe can you do 3 people? Could we do 3 of us at once? And we can talk through the results of what you guys thought of the testing process. And I'd like to do a test to frame it up, and then we'll figure out how close it got to you.
Honestly, for her, that would be like all of her birthdays like coming at once. And she does it all. She does like the whole project she's helping me with just out of the goodness of her heart. Like I don't pay her a cent, and this would be like more than anything I could pay her. It's also funny like working with people.
Let's do it. That'd be great.
Sweet. I'm gonna tell her right after we finish. I'm gonna text her. She'll be over the moon. It's funny, like working closely with people and seeing where like your interests align and where they don't align, and like it's a funny process of like being in a team with like sort of different visions and different emphases. Yeah. That's really sick. Wow, I think we basically covered the full spectrum of the story, all the way from the beginning through the most incredible moments in your life that changed, that broke, you know, your previous ways of thinking, and opened up new realities to you. And firstly, just like thank you so much for sharing yourself with us and for making the time and the openness to share all of that. And I hope that like other people who hear your story will be inspired and know that they're not just crazy, or they're not just alone in the middle of nowhere with like no community and no guidance, no you know, brotherhood or sisterhood. I think that's a really important thing, and I think that's like one message which I want to take out of this. And also like the idea that we don't have to be kept in by the boundaries of our own or the borders of our own traditions and religions, that like a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or an atheist can come to like this community and be like, wow, these people are really doing something which like I'm feeling deeply in an entirely different language, an entirely different culture, entirely different context. Yeah, so just a huge thank you for sharing that with us.
No, it's awesome. And look, you're building this community, right? So I mean, thank you for putting it out, like putting this thing out and deciding that what you want is voices. You don't just want to like be the thing. You want to facilitate a space where these things can happen. So
absolutely, it's
stellar. And I'll be honest, this, like, I've never told this story from start to finish. No one's asked me to do what you've asked me to do. So it's just been, sometimes you hear yourself and you see your story and you feel how you respond to different portions. You're like, oh wow, I didn't realize that was that meant this to me, you know, until I went back and really revisited it. So it's been edifying for me too, just to think back through and walk back through it too. And
that's really great.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you, man. And we mentioned very briefly while we were texting, and I don't even know like what made me say this, but like something about making some sort of like a Seekers chapter where people in their own, I don't even know what this would look like, and I'm curious to know if you have a thought of what this might look like, of where people in their own communities can have like because I think that technology has its limitations, and that people need to meet up in person and like be able to share and commune and be in community with one another. So if you have any, if I'm actually just putting it out there now, like to anyone, to you and to anyone who's listening, if you have any idea of what that might look like and how that might be, the idea of some sort of real like cross-faith communities, because there's like, I grew up like around a lot of interfaith work, and it was so, firstly, it was never actual people in communities. It was always just like, you know, the priest and the rabbi and the imam getting together and like talking about like usually inconsequential things. And like, but to have an actual space where people from actual different faith groups can actually learn from one another and share with one another and be inspired by one another, that's something which I think would be tremendous and revolutionary.
I think it would be huge, man. I'd do it right now. If there was something local right here where I could sit down and talk to like-minded people from completely different faiths and pick their brain and hear, like, I already do it. I just do it like this with you or with my buddy Catalino, right? If I want to hear about the Hindu Vedas and we want to compare notes about, you know, I already love it. So it would be so cool to have a physical space, right? Yeah. Where you could foster a community where you can come in and be what you are and bring your tradition with you. And we can talk about this, like, what's it look like to move from one part of the spectrum, maybe the more conservative, into the more liberal, or maybe the inverse. Maybe somebody shows up and they've moved the other direction. I think that would be so cool, man. I'd love to. I don't know what it would look like, but I'd love to do it.
Listen, Steve, we put the wish out there to the universe, and it's just a matter of time until it manifests. Once the will is there. Thank you so much, Steve. It's been a pleasure again, and like I got a chance to like rewatch some of the first conversation, and I was like, this guy is just a bro, and like I really felt like connected with you right away. And I don't mean a bro like a basic bro. I mean like a brother.
Likewise, bro. Man. Likewise.
So yeah,
No, I know. I feel you. I feel
Oh,
you. I
good,
get it.
good, good. Enjoy the rest of your day. May it be a good one and filled with blessing and motivation. And let's stay in touch.
You too, brother. Much love, but we'll be in touch. We'll talk soon.
Thank you so much.